to go in just a second. There we go. So as I was saying, welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining for our fourth session. I'm really, really excited to bring you this particular topic, which is a topic that is very close to my heart. And the speakers that we've got today are all people that I know personally. I've curated the panel based on my kind of direct experiences and interactions with each of these people. And I know that all of them have got really interesting and exciting questions and insights and experiences to share with you all. I'm not going to give you an introduction to each of them because you will have seen how fantastic they all are based on the bios that I circulated on the Eventbrite, but I will really quickly just give you a brief intro to kind of how I know each of these people and just my observations and interactions with them. So Abby, because she's the first person that appears on my screen, we're in Chambers together. Abby has sat on various committees in Chambers. She's what I call the thorn in the system in Chambers when she's been on those Chambers committees, and she's always the one to ask those difficult questions and prod when something's not quite right. And it's through those kind of experiences in Chambers that her and I have developed a good relationship and friendship. So thanks, Abby, for joining us today. Shanti is not in Chambers with me, but we are both junior counsel to the Grenfell Tower Inquiry. Shanti is an example of somebody that when you desperately need an ally in a situation where you might feel a little bit isolated. And we've developed a friendship through our years on the inquiry. And as a result, I've invited her to be on the session today. So thank you so much, Shanti. Raj, some of you may remember from the first session, if you were on that first session, is somebody that I studied with at university. She is, in addition to all the things that you would have read about her, a fierce activist and advocate for all things gender equality, specifically in the South Asian culture. The founder of the Pink Laddu project, which is her baby and like a global campaign, and everybody should definitely check that out. In a lot of ways, we are the same person, but not quite the same person. So thanks, Raj, for being here. Faiza, we've got on the session today. She is another person that I've worked with through a fantastic project called Project Ribcage. She's involved with lots of stuff outside of the law, really working to elevate the experiences of women from different communities and making sure that those voices are platformed and heard. And I'm really excited for her to bring those experiences to the session today. I've also got Shaheen, who is somebody that I met actually via LinkedIn a while ago, like years ago, which as aspiring lawyers, it's something that you guys will come to do a lot of. He's somebody that is a revolutionary in a lot of ways because he's not very senior, but he's won like 1 million awards. So definitely check out Shaheen and all of the innovative stuff that he's doing with Black Antelope Law. And I hope I haven't missed anybody. I think I haven't missed anybody. I think that's everybody. Yeah, and then there's me, obviously, who you guys know. So there were a couple of things that I wanted to say to introduce the session, but I recognize that I've been talking a little bit more than I would like to. So what I'm going to do is just actually go straight to the panelists and ask them to give a brief introduction about themselves and their kind of insights into this particular theme. And then I'll go back to some of the bits that I wanted to share with you a little bit later on. So I'm going to start with Abby because she's the first person on my screen. So Abby, if you wouldn't mind sharing your experiences.
Sure, yeah. So as Z has said, I'm in Chambers with her. And I think in terms of my background, I'm often placed in quite interesting positions. So I'm obviously Black, but I'm very privileged. So I was in private education from the age of 6. I went straight from school to Oxford, pretty much straight from Oxford into pupillage, and then got tenancy. And I think that because of the fact that I sort of straddle on the one side being an obvious minority, but on the other side being somebody who was brought up very much within the kind of system of privilege, where I'm in positions that I have a lot of insight into certain aspects of prejudice and the struggles that people face, while at the same time speaking like the people who are often the people who are behind the oppression. And I think I've been quite lucky in that because of the way that I speak and because of the background that I have, people tend to listen. when I bring up issues and when I want to raise things. So I very much kind of see myself as somebody who is part of the problem, but at the same time, I'm very lucky to be able to use my voice to assist and to raise the voices of others, which is more what I do. I think I'm very aware that I need to take a step back and give other people space to speak about certain things because of the background that I come from.
That's ace. Thanks so much, Abby. Shanti, would you mind going next?
Sorry, the delay with the microphone. So I'm a mixed race Asian queer woman, which I like to think of. I've ticked at least 3 boxes on that tick box. I moved to the UK when I was 18, and since then I've lived intermittently in the UK. So I've also lived in the Philippines, Switzerland, France, and Netherlands. And I mention that because you do get a sense when you live in different places of just how it can feel to be in the UK. And I feel the bar, more than any other area of work, you are constantly judged by how you look and how you come across. And you do feel very differently in the UK as a minority and how you're treated as opposed to in other places. In respect of this issue and challenge that I've faced, is I feel there's a lot more awareness about diversity, especially over the last few years. I feel people are bringing it up. They'll bring up my gender, my ethnicity when you're talking to them, often even unsolicited. And so there's a positive thinking about it, but at the same time, I'm not sure whether the substance behind it has changed. And I think one of the instances that was most illustrative to me of that was when a very senior QC commented in passing that he thought the reason that his chambers wasn't very diverse was because they had such a rigorous recruitment policy. So there's instances like that where people are obviously trying to think about diversity but aren't really challenging their thinking behind why there isn't the same diversity. So that was a bit about myself and how I see the bar in this issue.
Thank you so much, Shanti, for sharing that. Faiza, can I ask you to go next, please?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Yeah, so my name's Faiza, spelt funny. You'll see it in loads of different ways, but Faiza's fine. I am currently working in-house. I work for Vitality Insurance. I work in their legal department, specifically in like the tax and trusts area. So very, very niche, can be difficult sometimes, but it's fine. I do come from a background that some might say is particularly like challenged. I think that's the word that people tend to use these days. I am from a working class background. My parents, I'm essentially first generational, so I was the only one to have been born here. My parents were born in Nigeria. They came over here in like their 30s. So first to go to my uni, to a uni, should I say, I obviously am Black. So again, working class, went to a standard ex-polytechnic uni. I went to Birmingham City, and I'm a Muslim as well. So literally, like Shanti, I tick the boxes. Sometimes, you know, these are the things that people think make you diverse. In my opinion, I'm just standard. There's nothing, you know, okay, I'm special because I say I'm special, but there are still some things that some people might say that, yeah, I'm not from the majority, basically. What else? I qualified in 2019, so last year, March. I trained at a regional firm. It's got loads of offices. They want to be known as like the high street firm, but it's everywhere, basically. But the most important thing is I'm now working with people who trained at Linklaters, Withers, that there's no difference between me and them now. So it's like, okay.
Brill, thanks so much for sharing that, Faiza. Really appreciate it. Shaheen, can I ask you to share next?
Hi, thanks Z for such a generous introduction, actually. So my name's Shaheen.
You're going to have to explain all those awards now, Shaheen.
No. Thank you so much. So my name's Shaheen. I'm one of the co-founders of Black Antelope Law, which is a challenger law firm, which also collaborates between barristers and solicitors under one roof. My journey itself, I mean, I co-founded Black Antelope Law when I was 26. But the difficulties to get to that sort of position was very, very hard. So I left uni at the age of 24, having finished LPC and my law degree, and trying to get a training contract, etc., was very difficult. And it all comes down to the issue of what your background is, essentially. Like a lot of the panel members here, of a BME background, working class background, went to education in Hackney and Islington. Nothing unique about myself, nothing extra curricular activities, but throughout the journey, you realize how much of a issue diversity is in the legal profession. And some of the questions we'll actually address later on is the sort of progression that's been taken, but there's still so much to be actually undertaken. I also sit on the Law Society's Equality and Diversity Committee, and myself there, I've actually seen so much like work that needs to be done in the legal profession, especially with the solicitors industry. It's people like myself and the panel members who are sort of working really hard to actually tackle this issue, and we hope that we can inspire other people to sort of follow our journey and continue that work.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shaheen. Raj?
Hey peeps. Yeah, I just want to second what Shaheen said. Thank you for the very generous introduction. I am a qualified solicitor and a writer. I also run the Pink Ladoo project. My work now is mainly with high growth tech startups. So I do a bit of a roving chief operating officer role where I help these businesses expand and scale very rapidly. I'm also a lawyer as well, so I take care of their commercial legal requirements. And I trained at Travers Smith. Prior to that, I spent a few years being a consultant at Accenture. I never had any interest in any commercial law, any of these commercial things, but I did them because we graduated in the recession and I needed a fat, heavy CV. And I got to the point where I realized I needed to qualify and anywhere would do. I did knock on all the doors of all the major human rights firms for many years, repeatedly. So I ended up just thinking, you know, I'll qualify wherever I can and then I'll find a way to work my other passions. I have quite distinct views and I think quite defined views on diversity, particularly as it comes to the intersectionality of race and sex. I founded the Pink Ladoo project in 2015, but it wasn't a coincidence that it came when it did. You know, 2014 was basically the Helena Morrissey glory years. You might all know her as the white woman that is at the helm of the 30% Club. So all of the media narrative we saw 5 years ago around elevating women into board statuses and board positions was all because of Helena Morrissey. And then she rather controversially came out with a statement saying that whilst she was in favor of quotas for sex, she was not in favor of quotas for race or physical ability. And it really made me think that actually what the initiatives that we see are just going to see the privileged white man replaced with the privileged white woman. And it made me deeply, deeply uncomfortable. I also started to ask the question of, you know, all these workplace initiatives to elevate women are really sexy and fun, but as a community, you know, South Asians have some questions to answer about behaviors in the home that might be dampening those broader efforts. So that's kind of some of the work I've done. I take quite personal offense to the idea that diversity initiatives lead to the promotion of subpar candidates. I don't think that's true at all. I think the only thing that diversity initiatives do is they cull mediocre white people. So, you know, that's kind of my views on that. And that's, you know, how I've firmly planted myself in this space. I think my views are quite widely known, but it hasn't always been easy, nor has my journey in law. I've had to, you know, I've chewed off half my tongue, I think. Sometimes you just have to get through, but that's a bit about me and my background.
Thanks so much, Raj, for sharing and also joining us again on another session. I guess I should take the opportunity then just to tell you all a little bit about me and what it is that made me kind of start this platform and also this particular session. So similar to what other people have said, I'm obviously British, I'm a Muslim woman, Bangladeshi heritage, a Brummy, which may come out in some of my voice in these sessions. And from a very working class background, mum and dad never worked, all of that stuff that you guys usually hear, tick all of those boxes. But I feel like I was one of those exceptions that made it through the bar, you know, as a result of grades that I may have got, or doing all right in interviews and being offered pupillage and all of that. But what I take issue with is the fact that people use stories like that as an example that social mobility works. That really bothers me. What also really bothers me is this kind of, a lot of the diversity initiatives, events, movements that I've kind of seen, there's this whole thing which is about anybody can access the bar, anybody can be a lawyer. And I think personally, I believe that's really irresponsible to say things in that way, because in doing that, what you're not doing is taking into account life experiences, the barriers, the structural barriers that different people face. And it's all of that stuff that has kind of come to its, I guess, fruition in the last couple of years for me, where it kind of just feels that I've kind of coasted through and become this social mobility poster girl. But actually, I think it's all nonsense. And so I am obviously a barrister. I'm part of the system, but the system is the problem. So it's my mission really to shed light on those issues, and for people that come from those underrepresented groups to, yes, support them in accessing careers like this, but not with any rose-tinted view. I want people to want to come to the bar or want to be a solicitor, but in full understanding of the challenges that exist, and not to feel bad if maybe things don't work out for them first time round like it does for other people. And on that note, what I wanted to do, if I can figure out how to share my screen again, is just kind of situate this conversation in a broader context, because I think that's important as well. And also just offer a couple of caveats. Can everybody, is just loading. So the first things I wanted to say is a big thank you to everybody who's signed up and registered. We've raised £155.50. I think it might be a little bit more because we had some late registrations for the Magic Breakfast, which is actually a charity Raj told me about. Check them out. They do some amazing work there. They provide breakfasts for children at risk of hunger from, you know, backgrounds that basically their parents can't afford, to make sure that they've got food on the table for every meal. So I'm sure you'll all agree that it's a really worthwhile cause. I'm really grateful for the speakers for sharing their time today, and also all of you who have registered and made your voluntary donations. But back to what I was saying about situating this conversation, and I wanted to make some things clear before we embark on the Q&A. And the first thing is that I make absolutely no claims in saying that this panel that I've put together is fully representative, because there is no way that in one event or with one set of people you're ever going to fully represent all the different intersections or groups or issues that need to be represented in events like this. I wanted to make that clear because, as I said earlier, I've been to lots of other events where people think they're being diverse and inclusive because they've got maybe, I don't know, one woman on the panel or one brown face on the panel, but that isn't what true diversity or inclusion is about. And I wanted to make that caveat clear. An example of that is I was contacted by somebody on Twitter on the back of this event asking if I had any barristers or lawyers on the panel that had a disability. And my honest response to her was, no, I didn't. And I couldn't secure somebody to represent that experience on the panel. But it just got me thinking about the fact that there are so many other areas that need to be discussed. And this is just the starting point of one conversation, but there are many more that need to be had. And that is something that I would encourage. Obviously, we all relate to particular issues in particular ways, but that's not to take away the importance from others. I've already mentioned this point about honest insights. I'm not going to give you the rose-tinted glasses. None of these panelists are going to give you the rose-tinted approach to, yes, everybody's welcome at the bar, everybody's welcome to be a solicitor, you can all do it, it doesn't matter your background. That is not the place that I'm coming from, because it is just simply not true. And I think there needs to be better education around this point for aspiring lawyers, because if you're going to pursue this route, and you absolutely should if it's something you want to do, but it should be with open eyes. Raj touched on this, but the importance of intersectionality, a big fat topic and a topic for another day. But what I mean when I say that is there are going to be things that are discussed in this session or other sessions on diversity that will relate to you or not relate to you, or different things will relate to people in different ways. For example, my experiences as a Muslim woman is going to be different to Abby's experience as a Black woman. Shaheen's experience as an Asian male is going to be different to Raj's experience as a light-skinned brown female. Similarly, the experiences of a white man are going to be different to the experiences of a white woman. It's about understanding that different levels of people's identity will create different experiences. And I want to make that clear, because whilst everything that's discussed in this session may not apply to you directly, what I do want to kind of nurture through this platform is this notion of allyship and community with other people. So even if it might not directly relate to you, you can be in community and in solidarity with somebody else that is suffering from that particular challenge, for example. And I raised that because actually the key challenge that I was going to kind of speak about was, in my experience so far in the 7 years at the bar, is one of isolation and in some ways a lot of loneliness, because people just don't get you. And that's why through this platform, one of the things that I'm hoping to promote is this notion of more community, more solidarity, and more allyship. Really, really briefly, and I'm not going to take you through these in much detail, but just because I want you to understand the kind of broader context, and I would encourage everybody to look at this in your own time, on the topic of things not being rosy for everybody, is looking at the diversity statistics that exist in both professions. I should also caveat that statistics comes with issues in and of themselves. So take them for face value, but don't take everything that they say. For example, one of the issues that I have is the fact that BAME is always dealt with in one big umbrella term, but what you're not doing is breaking down the different groups between that constitute BAME and looking at those statistics based on individual groups. So it might look like there's been progress within BAME, but has there been progress specifically in the Black community, the Asian community, the Bangladeshi community, the Pakistani community, all these different other communities? And that's something that's important. Raj also made a point privately to me earlier, and I'm not sure if it's the same with the bar stats, but it's worth looking into, is that for some of the diversity statistics in the solicitor profession, is that they include grammar schools within the state school statistics. And obviously there is some issues around that, because grammar school education is still selective education. But again, conversations for another day. So
it's split along fee paying and not fee paying. There's no distinction between, for example, going to a comprehensive school in an inner city setting and then going to a grammar school in the countryside where all of your teachers are Oxford graduates. So
so exactly that. So Abby's point reiterates Raj's point, which is there are issues with the stats themselves, and that's also something to bear in mind. But you can see from the screen some of the ones that I've pulled off in relation to disability, gender, fee-paying schools. One that I thought might be of interest to the kind of audience we've got on this session today is the one which is the penultimate point, which I was horrified by it when I actually referred to it in an article I've written, but I don't know why I was horrified about it, because it is just what it is. So basically, of UK, EU, BPTC graduates with a 2-1 degree and are very competent at BPTC, 44% of them from white backgrounds will get pupillage. But if you're from a BAME background, only 23% will get pupillage, even though the degree classification is exactly the same and the grade at bar school. So that's something that personally struck me. A couple of others more recently, even about the impact of COVID. And the reason why I included these was because it's also not right just to think that the issues are at entry level. The issues persist throughout the profession as you go on at every level. So whether women progress in the same way because they're going to often have children, maybe there are issues around that. There are issues around levels of people that go on to become QCs or partners in solicitors firms. So it's really important to understand that whilst there are issues at entry level, those issues remain even whilst you're in the profession. I did try and get some solicitor ones, and I pulled this off the SRA website, and what it reports is similar types of issues around progression of women at partner level, issues with BAME people being represented at types of partners, but also at what types of firms, which I found interesting. So, for example, there's a really high proportion of BAME lawyers in high street kind of work, but not necessarily in the magic circle kind of work. So I'm not going to bang on about these because you get the point, but I just wanted to take some time to, again, situate this conversation that we're having today, and also just provide you with more of a context to what is really the situation with the legal profession. The fact is, there are issues, it needs to change, and that's why people like you, from all the variety of backgrounds that you do come from, in this full knowledge, can hopefully continue to pursue your careers, but knowing what the deal is, and also just knowing how to access people that have had maybe similar experiences, or can relate to similar aspects, and learn from that, I guess, and for there to at least be some kind of mentorship. So with all of that said, I promise I'm going to be quiet now, and we're going to move on to the questions. Thank you to everybody that sent in questions in advance. I'm going to make those the priority ones that we go through for the session. If we have any extra time, I'll deal with any extras that people might have. I'm going to take them in order because it's the easiest. This one, Abby's going to deal with. How do you deal with comments made about your background in interviews? Is it worth challenging it during the interview or dealing with it afterwards?
So I think this question's a tricky one. It depends obviously on what the comment is in terms of your background, because I think there is a line to be drawn between asking legitimate questions about somebody, wanting to learn more about them, about, for example, where their passion for coming into the career comes from, whether there's anything about their story that you find interesting. And then there's the idea of just sort of being a bit voyeuristic, going into somebody's background, asking them overly personal questions, things which are quite intrusive, things which reveal presumptions that you've made about somebody which are incorrect. So the first thing I think is to take a step back and think about why you're at that interview and why you're at that particular place. And I think one thing that candidates forget about the interview process and the application process is that it is as much for you as the candidate as it is for the company, the chambers, the firm that you are applying to. This is probably the first in-depth contact that you have had, or the first conversation that you've had with somebody who actually works at that company, who actually works at that firm. It's your chance to get a flavour of what the environment is going to be like. So if there are things that they say in that interview which make you feel uncomfortable, and if there are things about their approach to things that make you feel dissatisfied, that make you feel as though it's not somewhere that you want to be, dig into that feeling and think about whether or not that's even a positive or healthy environment for you to go into. So, for example, if you're applying as a pupil, you've got to think about the fact that that's somewhere that you can end up at for 18 months. A lot of criminal pupilages, for example, that's the area that I practice in, are no longer just a 12-month pupillage. They're around 16 to 18 months. Do you really want to be in an environment where they think that asking questions in that way, if it's crossed the line and become inappropriate, where asking questions in that way is the right way to go about things? Is that the sort of place that you want to be at? But on the other hand, there are things that people say and do without thinking, which are wrong, but don't have that malignant or that negative intention behind it. And so the first thing to say, and I think it's something that Z has already touched upon, is there are going to be times when you work in the legal profession where people say and do things which are just entirely wrong, which are really prejudicial. You're going to be going into an environment where the people with power are people who do not reflect yourself and do not reflect the families that you come from. That's just the fact. We've seen it in the statistics already. And so it's also just reflective of the legal profession as a whole. So I think you just have to know yourself very well and know where your boundaries are before you even go into your interviews, to consider whether it's something that you want to even make an issue of. When I say make an issue of, I don't necessarily mean like kick and scream and so on, but if it's even something that you want to say anything about at that moment in time. It's also really tricky because they're the person with all the power. You've worked really hard to get there. And so the onus doesn't have to be on you to react in that very moment. If there's a way for you to navigate the question where you can still remain comfortable, I would say maybe just answer the question in that way and then give yourself the space and time to think about it after the interview. So yeah, that's my long-winded way of saying think about why you're in the interview and whether or not that's a company that you definitely do want to continue at. Look at the question and how it's phrased, and look at the other members of the panel as well to see how that question landed with them, because it could just be an anomaly. It could be somebody putting that question forward and it's not really reflective of how that company feels. If you are comfortable answering the question, then answer the question. If you do not feel comfortable answering the question, then you could deflect it, you could put it back to them, and you can just try and avoid answering it or bringing something else up instead. But I would just say there's no standard answer that I can give to this, unfortunately. But I would just say, just give yourself the time and space to think about that. And if that means dealing with that after the interview, that is fine. You don't need to be the kind of warrior in the interview setting whilst also dealing with all the other things that you deal with as an interview candidate. I hope that helps. I'm sure the others on the panel will have other aspects to put forward, but it's a tricky kind of scenario, especially when you're there as a candidate who's probably quite invested in making a good impression during an interview process.
That's great. Thanks so much, Abs. I'm going to move on to the next question because we've got quite a few to get through. It's for all of the panel, but I think I'm going to direct this at Pfizer first. Do you feel there is a pressure or expectation to be an unblemished, exceptional representative of your background in order to be seen the same as the majority?
Thanks for that. In short, yes. So basically, I'm saying they as in, the outside. So apologies if it sounds offensive, but I just mean the outside. So they want the black face, but they want you to shut your mouth, basically. That's what they want from you. They want to take pictures and they want to show, oh, look, we are representing, people from all kinds of backgrounds, and this one is perfect. And whereas that's not the case. It's not even the case for the people who make up the majority. So say you are in a majority, majority white firm, it's not, they're not perfect themselves. And I can tell you that for a fact. In one scenario, for example, I was faced kind of with a partner of a firm, and we were just kind of having a laugh, what I thought was a laugh. He kept calling me feisty. So he would rearrange my name and then say, oh, yeah, it looks like feisty on paper, but no, it's Pfizer, okay. And then when he kept saying it, I was with him for about 6 months, so it was one seat. So he kept saying it, and then I was like, one day I said, I'm not going to take this anymore, because he wouldn't say that, my colleague next to me, who obviously wasn't black, is feisty. And I'm not feisty. I can be, but I wasn't. So, in this one time, I decided, I'm going to challenge him. And then I said, I thought that was some old school joke, basically. And then he started laughing. I was like, ha, you bitch. And then I shut the front door. I couldn't believe what had happened. Whoa. So what that to me was that, how is that acceptable? How is that okay? I've challenged you on something that you clearly think that most kind of black women are, and your next response was to call me a bitch. There were people in the room. Some girl was shuffling her papers. She dropped her papers. It was because everyone was shocked that he'd said that, and he'd said it in front of people as well. So what I'm getting at is that, yes, they want you to be this this perfect image of basically what they already hire, what they're already used to, but it's just that you're black, or it's just that you're Asian. And that's not the case. That isn't the case. I am who I am. I was brought up in Brixton, and some of the roughest things are norms to me. So that is what makes me me. And so no, I don't look, I'm not an unblemished black person. So yeah, it was wild, but that's what I think that they want. And the pressure is there. The pressure will always be there, unfortunately, for the foreseeable. We have to make sure that, one, we're not reacting disproportionately. So had I kicked off, started, kicking and screaming, that would have been, in their eyes, kind of like, it would have been disproportionate. It would have been, and that could have, resulted in me being fired or whatever. I had to make sure that I just kind of laughed it off, and I was like, oh, that was new. That was cheeky. and then left it at that. And the person who saw it kept saying, oh, are you going to complain? And I was like, listen, I'm a trainee, a first seat trainee. I just want to get through this. So I put up with it. Don't get me wrong, my final seat, these things kept happening. My final seat, I was bringing out all the complaints. I said, so this happened on this date, this happened on this date. And because I was like, I don't care anymore. I don't have to put up with anything. I'm out the door. As soon as I qualified, I was gone. So, yeah.
Faiza, thanks so much for sharing that and some really, really personal insights there. I think a lot of us can maybe relate to things happening when you're very, very junior and feeling like you can't say anything. I know that I've been in those particular situations. I had an example of being told whilst I was in pupillage that there is another example, but I'm not going to share that, but this example I will, which is I was told that I should stop tweeting about Palestine and the Palestine conflict and things like that, because I'm quite a big activist on certain areas, and that's an area that I'm very passionate about. And I just had to say, I mean, to be honest, other people might have said okay, but I was like, sorry, I'm not going to stop tweeting about Palestine. If I don't get a tenancy here, then I don't give a shit. I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not saying that everybody should react in that way, but one thing that I've always tried to commit myself to is, you know what, this is who I am, this is what I believe. If you don't want it, then screw you. But it's very difficult. It's very difficult of anyone that has felt like they have had to be quiet. And don't get me wrong, I've had to be quiet on other things. When you get more senior, that's your time to really start, you know, making those changes and making that noise and calling people to account, because that's what we can do now when you're in that position of power. Shanti, was there anything that you wanted to say in relation to that question?
Yeah, like actually, I think a lot of us have been in similar positions to what Faiza's been in, where, you know, especially when you're at the junior end of the bar, and the bar can be really, really bad for this because you don't have human resources, you don't have the same kind of accountability systems or mechanisms in which you can complain or have some kind of oversight. And when you're in a position in which you don't have power, how do you call out these comments? But what I have found as I've got more seniors, you can turn around, and if you see it happening to somebody else, and I have been in these positions where I've seen very senior members make comments that are completely inappropriate to other junior members and chambers, you can then, once you've got tenancy, once you're secure, actually say, no, I don't think that's okay. Because it's, you know, by then you're in the door, they can't really push you out. But it's so difficult when you're a trainee, when you're a pupil, to call out that kind of behavior. And unfortunately, it's still going on. One thing I would as well just add to that is I feel the pressure to just do so much better and be better than your white counterpart is really there. Because if we look at the statistics that Zina opened with, if you've got a 2-1, you've got half the chance of getting pupillage. It doesn't stop there. It's not just once you've got pupillage. You always have to work so much harder to prove that you're the same or better, or, you know, or you're equivalent to your counterparts. And unfortunately, I feel like that reflects the type of work that the bar is, because there's so much that rests on how you look and how you present yourself, how you sell yourself, and less on what you're able to do, that you do just have to work so much harder for it. I feel like it's an unfortunate reflection of the inequality of the system that we live in.
Thank you, Shanti. Shaheen, I'm going to move on to a question for you, if you don't mind dealing with this one, please, which is, with regards to events which include alcohol or evenings out at the pub, how did you approach or reject this so you do not come across as rude? And I know your situation is different because you've got your own firm thing, but I'm sure that you can relate.
So I'll be the first to admit that I used to avoid going to the pub or going to such events like that where drinking is involved, purely because of my faith and my background, and just generally I never felt comfortable. One thing I realized in the legal profession is if you don't attend those events, social drinking, etc., then the likelihood of yourself getting a promotion, especially when you're from a BME background or working class background, is very limited. It's quite like an old boys club, essentially, especially in the solicitors industry, where your ability to even go up the ranks and become an associate and a partner becomes very limited if you're not attending those events. Me personally, I never used to attend those events. I used to just avoid them like the plague. And I felt like that affected me quite early on in my career, despite the fact that I thought I was doing quite well in my training contract. I was going out marketing for the firm, in the city firm that I was doing my training contract, bringing in clients. I was working literally 10 from like 12 hours a day. It was quite unhealthy lifestyle, but I felt like I was excelling. However, I wasn't given the same opportunities. And when talks came, especially after qualifying from a training contract, what my position would be, if I was going to be given like an associate role, they were sort of trying to sort of play it down under, and they were saying, no, you can go to this department, that department. And it all came down to the fact that when you're avoiding events which are quite traditional in the legal sector, such as drinking, etc., that can impact your career. As stupid as it sounds, unfortunately, that is quite the norm, especially in the bar. Especially it's quite common for them to go to, is it the Pegasus bar or something?
I think there is one called the Pegasus that in a temple, I think.
Yeah, that is literally what happens every time. So you can imagine, like, that's how bad it is. But one thing I will say is that inspired me to actually create my own law firm, and I felt inspired to actually challenge those sort of values and say that I want to create an environment where I feel safe, I feel my faith I can practice without the fear, and I'm not accountable to someone who's essentially being, drunk essentially and telling me that my career is going in the wrong direction because I'm not attending, stuff like this. For young lawyers, unfortunately, it can feel quite pressurizing, and it can sort of damage your career quite early on if you're attending these sort of drinks all the time. Is one thing I would sort of say is sort of be very cautious when you attend such events, but don't feel pressurized to actually attend. At the end of the day, there's a lot of initiatives. I think quite recently, the Junior Lawyers Division actually came out with a statement to sort of stop these events actually and ban them. I feel like that's the right move to go ahead. I mean, there's nothing wrong. I mean, don't get me wrong, going to the pub, etc., having just a pleasant time with your colleagues, etc. But where it becomes the norm and where you feel pressurized to actually partake in it and you don't feel comfortable, then you should be given the opportunity to say no, and it shouldn't actually impact on your career. The sort of parallel between drinking and your career should have no connection at all, and unfortunately, that remains the case.
Thanks so much for that, Shaheen. I can relate to a lot of what you said, and Abby will know this as a colleague in Chambers, and also Shanti actually, because she knows that I never go to any of the drinks ever, and I'm always getting her out for a coffee. But as a pupil, I found it quite hard, and also I was told in my first six that I presented as somebody that was quite quiet, which for anybody that actually knows me is hilarious because I am not quiet by any sense of the word. But it's that perception of if you're not at all the socials, i.e. at the pub, you're somehow perceived as somebody that's a bit of a wallflower. Again, I'm nowhere near a wallflower. So I had to kind of be strategic in that I was like, right, I need to play the game to an extent. And I had to find a balance that at the time I was semi-comfortable with, although the truth is I wasn't really comfortable with it. And I would, if there were events, I would go to them occasionally, show my face, have a lemonade or a cranberry juice, and then leave quite quickly within the event. As a tenant, I basically don't go to anything ever. And I'm like 5 years in now. The result of all of that is that as I mentioned earlier, there is a sense of isolation in that I definitely feel like I'm less connected to solicitors that I may have met, that colleagues may have met, or have got good relationships with them. I may see my clerks less often because any socials are generally around whatever's been organised. The report that Shaheen mentioned by the Junior Lawyers Division is something that I also looked at recently for a piece that I wrote. What was really great about that is, although my choice not to drink relates to my faith, it isn't just about faith, because people have loads of reasons they might not want to drink. Or maybe they drink normally, but they just want the option to have an alternative event. And I really liked the way that report was pitched at everybody. And it also was talking about how, better performance comes out of not always having alcohol related events, moving to a situation whereby you're having breakfast seminars or lunch and learns or alternative options, of which there are many. So in terms of a workaround, because in relation to the answer to this question, one of the things that I've tried to do is, if you're not going to be the social butterfly at those events, just make yourself known in other ways. So if you can go to networking events that are more education based, so seminars, lectures where you're actually learning something and the focus isn't alcohol, then obviously that's still an opportunity to meet people. Get involved with organizations or associations that relate to your particular interests. So for example, I went to a couple of Society of Asian Lawyer events or Muslim Association lawyers events, I think they're called AML. So there are ways around it, but I think whilst you're quite junior, it's quite hard. I've developed the confidence over the years. And again, Abby and Shanti will know this, just to say, I'm not coming. So sorry, let's go for a coffee and a cake when you've got the time. And, you know, it's kind of just become a known thing. So I think definitely early on, I was viewed as a little bit strange and just a strange person. But now it's kind of just become, yeah, that's just what it is. But yeah, so moving on from that, Raj, got a question for you. You spoke in the first session for Learning for Lawyers Redefined about speaking out when seeing discrimination at work. How did you weigh up whether to speak out?
It's a really interesting question. One thing I didn't share in my intro before is that I'm Sikh. I'm British. My parents, dad was born in India, mum was born here. I'm the first person in my family to finish high school. I spent many of my teenage years in Canada and then did a degree here as well. You know, first professional, first generation, all of that. Obviously, I'm incredibly privileged. I have very fair skin. I can pass as white. I'm your token brown girl that looks white, which is basically the dream diversity hire. And, you know, I'm Sikh, so we are often treated as the model minority, which is obviously a big problem in and of itself. In my career, at various different stages, I have experienced a lot of discrimination. And it's interesting that the question is phrased, how did I weigh up whether or not to speak out? In those days, actually, and if you know me quite well, this would probably make sense, but I didn't actually weigh up. I would always just sort of raise the flag. In my very early days before I became a solicitor, I did it, you know, by speaking to the agency that put me in that role, or speaking to HR. And then when I was at Travers, you know, I didn't want to talk about it, but basically the trainee team, so the three partners that were overseeing the trainees, basically pried it out of me because it was quite obvious that I was being bullied and I was a bit broken. Every single time it has cost me the job in one way or another. So in those early days, I never used to weigh up whether or not I should speak out. And I can list another time the ways in which it cost me my job. Sometimes I was directly fired. You know, in instances where I was a contractor and I complained about my boss accusing me of smelling like curry, my contract was terminated the next day. In other instances, it's been more subtle. You know, for instance, I wasn't offered a training contract at a position at Travers after I left. I was the only one out of our trainee pool of 20 trainees that didn't get an offer on qualification, and I was their star trainee. I had 5-star reviews. I was featured in the Lawyer magazine during that period, but it was my complaint about a senior male partner who's Asian that was bullying me that was the nail in my coffin, which has been confirmed to me by partners since I've left. It's, you know, now I definitely weigh up, and what I've learned is that there is no point in being the martyr to the cause. I used to see it as, you know, if I don't speak up about this, it will be a great blemish on me and on my character to have just sat here quietly. You know, I've read that Meghan Markle quote that if you don't speak up, who will? Well, I'm telling you, if you speak up, you might get fired. So you need to think about that. And don't let yourself be pressured into that mentality of needing to be the minority that, you know, impales herself on that stake, because like Faiza said, you know, I wish I'd had that level of self-restraint actually, and she showed, I don't think any reaction she would have had, even if she set that office on fire, would have been disproportionate to being called a bitch in response to saying, actually, I'm not feisty, that's not appropriate. So I don't think there is such a thing as a disproportionate response. However, I think you have to really weigh up the real risk that you are putting yourself at by speaking out. And I now would only speak up if I was confident that I have, you know, moved myself into a position where I am unsackable, i.e. I have been in an employment relationship for 2 or more years. Otherwise, I just don't think I'd have the guts to do it, because I've done it so many times and it's cost me emotionally, psychologically, and financially. So that's kind of how I would approach it now versus how I did in the past. I don't regret speaking out, but I think maybe I would have done things a bit differently knowing what I know now.
Raj, I wondered if, and it's a matter for you, whether you'd be willing to share your experiences at PyTop?
Yes. So I worked at an ed tech startup. So ed tech is like, there's lots of different tech sectors, but basically we made laptops that children could code and build themselves. I was their chief operating officer, and I was head of culture, legal, and talent. So basically the way the company behaved was on my head. I was the only woman and the only person of color on their management team. So everybody else in the C-suite was an old white man. I was also one of the youngest people. And we had a chief education officer who was a white man married to a black woman with 2 mixed race daughters. And he shared a picture of the one of the founders in a costume. And it was very apparent that the founder was in blackface in this costume. And, it was shared as a like, lol, guess who this is? Because, we used to share baby pictures of each other and be like, guess who this is? Like, this guy's in his nappy, who's that? Anyway, shared lol on a Friday night when they were all out for drinks and dinner, which is another reason why you shouldn't get pissed at work, because you'll do stuff like this. And I saw it on a Saturday morning, and I raised the alarm with my management team saying, this is a serious issue. Somebody has already responded to this photo with that full black moon emoji, the full moon emoji that's a black full moon. Somebody had responded to it with that. Guys, this is an issue. We need to deal with it. And that was on a Saturday. And then on the Sunday, I was a contractor there, so I wasn't an employee. Contractor, so we can explain that another time. You don't have employment rights. My contract was terminated on Sunday evening, saying that I was making a crisis out of nothing, that there was a black woman in the company that they had shown this to. She didn't think it was a problem, and it wasn't. And my services weren't needed anymore. And that was a really, really, really difficult experience, particularly because the man who shared it presented himself as an ally for all intents and purposes. And it was hard. Like, I think that actually it broke me because, I don't know what else I could have done. But it was a clear instance of blackface. And when I raised it, I was fired and, out the office by Monday. So, yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Raj. Courageous as ever and always.
Z, could I say something?
Yeah, of course.
Because it feeds into a question that was asked earlier about whether there's pressure when you're a minority to be like an unblemished person. I think what Raj has shared it shows one of the issues about having a lack of diversity in the workplace, is that when you have a minority or two in that workplace, they're elevated to a status of being the voice of all people of ethnic minority backgrounds. And all of a sudden there is this pressure on this one person to be the kind of signpost as to whether or not something is acceptable. And I just think the things which have shocked me from what Faiza has shared and from what Raj has shared is the fact that Faiza shared a story in which somebody else saw what happened to her, saw her being called a bitch, and her reaction was to ask Faiza if she was going to raise a complaint, not to go to Faiza and say, I will raise a complaint because I saw this. And, I will be your witness for you. If you simply have to say yes or no that this happened because I saw everything that happened. What that woman would say would be no different from what Faiza said. She was in just as much of a position to have raised anything. And instead she put it back onto Faiza again, consistently asking her over and over, are you gonna say anything? Are you gonna say anything? Whatever. And then Raj's story, again, it's she's an ethnic minority and she says this. Let's ask the other ethnic minority, because if the other ethnic minority says it's fine, those two things cancel each other out. And in fact, we can put more weight on the other ethnic minority because she's darker or because, she is the employee and we've got to listen to her. So it places that black woman in the position where the pressure is on her to now be the gatepost of racism and to dictate whether or not that's acceptable. And from what Raj is saying, I don't know that woman, but I would assure you that one of the thoughts in her mind would have been, they're putting it on me to be the person that tells them whether or not this is racist. The fact that they are asking her if it is racist means that there is something wrong with it. If you have to go to the person who's the ethnic minority and check whether or not something is acceptable, it's probably not acceptable. You know, that should have been their starting point. They should have said to Raj, what about this is wrong? What can we do better? Or just say, you know what, it's a picture which was emailed around. Let's just not email this picture around. It's got nothing to work, so it's completely inappropriate. But yeah, I mean, going back to that question, it's something that Zee and I talk about all the time, which we're both a bit tired of, which is that we're constantly the people who are being asked about diversity and inclusion initiatives. We're constantly the people who are being raised up as, oh, look at, you know, we've got these people who are doing really well in these areas, and that means that everything is okay. And that's not something which is endemic to our chambers. It's literally in every single structure that you have in this country, because we're underrepresented everywhere. Our voices become too focused. It becomes too focused on us to tell others as to what things should be and how things should be. Whereas if there were more of us, then it would be a normality, and you wouldn't need to consult with the Black person in the room about all of racism, you know?
Yeah. Insane power dynamics as well. Imagine a senior Black man asking a white woman who has just joined the company, is this photo racist? What's she going to say, right? And that, you know, that's what I'll, to conclude.
I think just linked on from what Abby was saying on that topic of having that like one ethnic minority, which shows that we're so representative and everything, slightly separate point, but it just reminds me of the whole like Priti Patel thing, how like we've got people like that in government, which, wow, you know, we're so diverse, we're representing the people, we've got Priti Patel, and it's like, you just ain't getting it. So even if you get a brown face or a black face or whatever that face is in that space, it does not automatically mean that you are being representative or inclusive of that community, because it just doesn't. But anyway, I had a question. I'm going to move on to Shanti and Shaheen. I'm going to ask you both to comment on this, please. I've actually moved them around based on what I allocated you. I hope you don't mind. Have you experienced imposter syndrome? And if so, how did you get over it? I'll start with Shanti first and then come back to Shaheen.
Oh gosh, I think every day. I'm still not quite sure how I ended up being a barrister, and it can be quite hard to remember that you deserve to be where you are, no matter how well you're doing. The way I deal with it is I just try and focus on what I want to be doing. I think it takes a strong sense of self to be well, I was going to say to be a barrister, but also to just practice in law, is you need to know who you are and what forms you, and also what interests you in the work. And that at least is what I focus on, is why I want to be doing the work. And I know that at least for my life and this life that I live, I want to be doing work that interests me, and that's what directs me. But the idea of, should I be here? Am I deserving to be here? Am I just here because they want to have someone who looks right? I constantly do struggle with that, but it's just reminding myself that I am able to do the work. I deserve to be at the table, and this is the type of stuff that I want to do, and I'm not going to take that away from myself.
Thank you so much, Shanti. Shaheen, was there anything to add from you?
Absolutely. I totally agree with what Shanti was saying. I mean, it feels like every day when you're from a BAME background and you're working class, it feels like you don't actually belong to the legal profession. Despite the fact that you might be achieving well, you might be, you know, excelling, you might be doing things that are quite new, brand new to the legal profession. It just feels like no matter how hard you try, especially when you turn up at events, etc., and you're talking about what your firm is doing, what your work you're doing, you just sort of feel like an outsider. You always seem as someone who's like a bit more disruptive. And it is natural to feel that. But one of the things that I learned in the legal profession is if it makes you feel uncomfortable and you feel like you can challenge it, then you're certainly going down the right path. The imposter syndrome, prime example of that is when I was giving a speech at the Black History Month Law Society's event, which was like 3 years ago. One of the questions was that was raised by the panel was essentially what do I do in my spare time? And I remember talking about sort of like how I listen to rap music, artists such as like Skepta, for example. You can imagine just like the whole panel and even like everyone that was like participating just look towards me and they're like, what on earth is this guy talking about? So like I say, it's always good to challenge the boundaries, and people like ourselves, people like the panel members, we're trying to add more representations, and it's always about challenging yourself. So if you're feeling uncomfortable, if you feel like you're not in the right profession, it's certainly not the case. You certainly are in the right place. It's just you have to change values.
Thanks so much, Shaheen, for that. I'm just going to go through this list. Just give me 1 second. Faiza, do you have any, given all the kind of context of this theme and the fact that sometimes things can feel uncomfortable, do you have any best tips for networking, especially at dinners and drinking receptions?
So this is a funny one because I remember attending like some Black History Month things at kind of like the Magic Circle type firms and thinking, what the hell am I doing here? Because even though it was a Black History Month event, there are different types of Black people, of course. There are Black people who, you know, are into certain things and Black people who aren't into certain things. And it just so transpired that the people who were at that event were the Black people that weren't into the same kind of things that I was into. And that was apparent, like just off speaking to, sometimes you can just tell when you kind of get into conversation and you aren't necessarily clicking, you don't have anything in common. It's like, whoa, okay. So I think one thing that I learnt, probably it takes some time. You do have to attend a few to kind of get a knack for, you know, for I guess excelling at these networking events. You just need to know who you are. And that sounds so like cliche and like, oh, she's writing a book, but I'm not. I'm just trying to say that when you know who you are, you're comfortable, you're happy, you're confident, and you can go into these events and you can be you, you can express yourself well. You're not kind of going to be and ahhing, just trying to please the person that you're talking to. You're not gonna, and that's something that don't try and please anybody. You're there to learn foremost. You're there to learn things. You're there to get your name out there. You're there to learn about different experiences and other people's experiences. So don't try and please anybody, because then you're not going to get anything from that event. You're just going to get another name on your LinkedIn list that you're never going to speak to in like 10, 15, you're not going to speak to them. So I think my major tip is just go in there, be confident. Okay, you might say some slang words every now and again. Okay. So the more you kind of even get into work, sometimes I don't speak that much slang anymore, but back then I did. I'd say bruv, fam all the time. That was me. That was how I spoke. I think but the more work you do, you kind of fall out of that, because obviously I was, at court all the time, and I can't be speaking to deputy judge and I'm saying, yeah, fam. Like, you can't do that, obviously. So you start to drop these habits and stuff like that. It's not that you're trying to be someone that you're not. You're just kind of what's the word? You're kind of getting accustomed to your climate, to where you are, to your environment. That's how things are. But just be confident. There's nothing wrong with who you are. You're there for a reason. You were invited, or you saw this email because you are signed up to the correct mailing list, or you know someone who thinks that you'd be great to attend that place. Be confident in yourself. You are there for a reason.
Thanks so much, Faiza. That was awesome. Abby, one for you, and it links into your recent LinkedIn post that got lots of likes and loves. Best way to continue being motivated after losing / getting rejected when your peers have got what you wanted, pupillage or scholarship?
Yeah, so if people didn't see the LinkedIn post, basically I posted up the fact that pretty much everybody who is a barrister or judge, senior, QC, whatever, has had a period of rejection. We've all been there. And I shared a story about my own rejection, which came after my first pupillage. And how it was a real blow because there were 4 of us in that intake, and similar to what Raj said, I wouldn't say I was the star pupil, but there were 4 pupils in the intake, and I was the only one who didn't get taken on as a tenant, and it was really painful. And I still think about it today and like cringe, because they called us into chambers, so we physically had to come in from where we were, and individually we were sat down and we were told whether or not we got tenancy. And then, so they were obviously told that they did. I was told that I wasn't. It was 1-to-1. But then that evening, so minutes later, we then had to go to this bar, which was at the bottom of where Chambers was, where they had a champagne reception. So they had this champagne reception for the other 3, where everyone from Chambers was attending. A lot of the solicitors that had been instructing us throughout pupillage, or were Chambers solicitors that they were introducing them to as these new tenants, were there. And I was the only failure. So I had to go into this room, I had to walk around, congratulating my friends, because I was really pleased for them that they got it, they all deserved it. And these solicitors and some members of Chambers were like, "Oh, did you get it?" I was like, "Nope. No, I'm the one that was rejected, but thank you very much for that." And after about 10 minutes, I burst into tears and just had to leave. And then I had about a month of continuing to have to go into Chambers, because everything was paper back then, into Chambers to pick up my papers, and back. And I never had any substantive feedback as to why I wasn't taken on. I didn't know who had voted against me. I wasn't really clear on what exactly the system was, because it was a panel system. So I think people either wrote in, still to this day, I don't really know, people wrote in references either in support or against you, and then the panel came to a decision as to whether or not they were going to take you on. And there was no interview with the panel either. Or no, there was an interview with the panel, I actually can't remember. But anyway, so I was in this position where I was constantly going into an environment where I had been for 16 months, slogging it out, and had no idea who there was wanting me there, who wasn't. I didn't know why people didn't want me there. I just knew that it must have meant that they didn't think I was good enough. And so, yeah, it was really low. And that at that same time, I was interviewing for third, sixth pupillages, because I obviously needed a new home to go to. And one set asked me, the first question they asked me in my interview was why I hadn't been taken on at my previous set. And it really just knocks me back, because I didn't know. And I also had really had to pump myself up to go to this interview, and really talk myself into it and tell myself it's okay, you're good enough, you're supposed to be a barrister, it's just one setback. And the rest of the interview was just completely awful after that, because I was just really taken aback by it. But what I would say is, once I then came through it, once I went to 25, got my pupillage at 25, with the help actually from a couple of people from QEB who put me in touch with the right people to speak to and to apply to. Once I got there, it just felt completely different. From the moment that I walked in, one of the clerks made a joke. And it was, I can't remember what it was, but I just remember laughing and then thinking, I literally never laughed with the clerks at my previous set. And they sat me down and they said, oh yeah, so we've spoken to these solicitors. They all think you're really great. They were all very confused about the fact that you weren't taken on at QEB. So we've lined up some work for you, blah, blah, blah. It was just a lot more substantive, was a lot more caring in terms of their approach. And I just straight away knew that I wanted to be at 25. And I straight away recognised that I hadn't been happy at my previous set. But I hadn't known any different, because it was the only set that I had been to. It's the only set I practiced at the bar at. I just thought that was what being at the bar was like. So I think the best way to come through the rejection is to just stay focused on what your personal goal is. Because it's really difficult with the bar, and I think in the same way actually with solicitors' firms as well. You don't know what the personalities of those places are really going to be like until you're there. And so these places may be top of whatever ranking on Legal 500 or on Chambers and Partners, but you're not really going to know the environment until you get there. So it might be that you don't get on, once you're there. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's because you're not good enough to do what you want to do. It could just mean that it's not the right fit for you. And also the other thing to recognise is that one of the things from doing that post is how many people commented underneath it. So if you guys find me on LinkedIn and look at that post and look at the people who've commented underneath it, we've got like Nikki Howard from my chambers, who is a QC and who has an amazing practice, who shares about the fact that she was rejected, she got pupillage, her first set didn't take her on after her first 6, her second set didn't take her on after her second 6, so she went elsewhere, and now she's ended up back at 25 Bedford Row, which is the set that rejected her after her second 6. And Jeremy Dean, who's one of our heads of chambers, he wasn't taken on at his first set either. He also had to do third 6s and so on. But these are people who are at the top of the profession, and it's very much just part and parcel of the journey. I think it's just really tricky when we're lawyers, because we have a certain type of personality where we really want to be the best, we really want to get to where we're going, we really want to excel at everything. And we work so hard to get to those places as well, that when you fail, it hurts even more and it feels so much more personal. But actually that failure along the way, it's actually just a very standard part of the journey. It's very rare to meet anybody who just sails through completely. And if they do, I think it's a lot more to do with luck than any sort of innate quality that they have over others. And also no one cares. Like, 10 years down the line, no one sits you down and asks you, and so why are you taken on by your third 6 or your second 6 or your first 6? Also, what A-levels did you do? And did you get straight A stars? No, like literally no one cares. What they care about is whether or not you read your papers and if your skeleton has been handed in on time and so on. So don't worry about it. Just crack on. But also take be sad about it. It's totally fine to cry and not stand in a bar and drink champagne in a room full of people who are celebrating somebody else's success, because that's a really weird thing to do to somebody when they've just been rejected.
I can't believe I made you do that, Abby.
Oh yeah, it was dark. It was really dark. But I knew it was coming. Because the year before, the same thing had happened to another person who hadn't been taken on, who is now at Doughty Street and is like a high flyer at the bar. It was just what they did. It's just what they did. And I don't know. They probably still do it. I don't know. But yeah, it was a terrible experience. It's a terrible experience.
Look at you now, Abby. If that didn't happen, we wouldn't have you at 25.
I know. And you know what? I'm not just saying this, I genuinely would have been miserable. I really never felt properly like I fit in there. Which feeds into, I think, another question which we have coming up. Sorry to take over the Z, but the question that's coming up about how do you navigate a space which is predominantly white?
Yeah, I lost your.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm very much middle class. The only thing that's different about me is that my background is that my parents are born and raised Nigerian, and I am Nigerian but born in England. And yet that, I can honestly say that difference really impacted my journey in my first set of chambers. So despite the fact that I had been talking the talk, walking the walk, been very comfortable in predominantly white spaces for all of that time, I still felt different when I went to QEB. And it wasn't anything that they consciously said or consciously did or anything like that. It's just that there are some chambers which are very led by fitting into a certain persona, and then there are other chambers that really enjoy the variety of personas that you have, but they have but they still have the same high standard as to how you present yourself when you get to court. And I think that QEB is just a lot more traditional in terms of the way that everybody presents themselves. And because I didn't quite fit into that, it really did knock on to everything else around my journey with them. But I didn't know that until I'd left. And that, I still have people at QEB that I get on with really well and still friendly with them and so on. But I genuinely would not have been happy being a tenant there. I can see that now.
Thanks, Abby. Shanti, the next one probably applies to you and I. When you feel that you don't fit in or don't look like the way in which a traditional barrister would in terms of educational background, i.e. not Oxbridge, how do you keep going?
Do you want me to take that one first?
Yeah, you deal with it, Shanti.
So I feel a little bit of a cheat because the answer I gave before, I think applies here as well, about remembering who you are and having a strong sense of self, because there's a temptation sometimes to just try and fit into such environments, but you don't want to lose yourself whilst like at the bar or in the legal profession, because you'll lose your sense of identity or who you are. I think you need to stay true to yourself, but at the same time, really consider just why you're there, what you want to be doing. And I think that's what really helps me carry myself through these environments. I really enjoy being a barrister. I like the work I do. I know why I want to do that work. But that, I think, can drive you through a lot more in those spaces.
Thanks, Shanti.
Or at least to continue to motivate me, yeah.
Yeah. I don't really have anything else to say to that other than to echo that. And I think for me, one of the things that I say a lot in a lot of my presentations working with young people is the pinnacle of success and the pinnacle of academic excellence is not restricted to Oxbridge graduates. And that is just a fact. And you need to understand this, because there are many, many, many excellent people that go to other really great institutions, or perhaps not even that great institutions, but that are still excellent, but they haven't been able to get to other institutions, perhaps by virtue of those structural barriers that I spoke to you earlier about. And also maybe people choose not to go to Oxbridge because it doesn't sit well with them. And that's a story for another day, but very briefly, I was encouraged at college heavily to apply for Oxbridge, and I made the choice not to because I had a strong sense of self even then, that I just thought there's no way in hell that I'm gonna thrive or survive or enjoy somewhere like that. And instead I went to Warwick. Best 3 years of my life, and I don't regret it at all. I know there's a running joke about Oxbridge graduates going to Warwick, but it wasn't an Oxbridge reject. I chose to do that. So I'd really invite you all to redefine how you understand academic success to mean, like what it means, because only if we continue to say that Oxbridge is the pinnacle of academic excellence, then will it be, but it just isn't. I've met plenty of people that are Oxbridge and they just ain't all that. And I've met people that are not Oxbridge and are pretty damn good at what they do, and they far exceed that. And look, a lot of people are super book smart, but they can't have a conversation with a normal person. Like, you see that a lot. So, you know, you might be able to pass exams and be really, really super smart and speak really well or whatever, but can you hold a conversation with somebody that comes from a totally different walk of life to you? So yeah, I'm not really big on the Oxbridge thing, as you can tell, but swiftly moving on. I would have really liked to have asked Abby about her experiences at Oxford, actually. Do you want to quickly say something while I find the next question?
Sure.
Did you like Oxford, Abby?
I did. But, you know, I liked it because I've been groomed for it since I was about 10. Yeah. I was so used to going to school and not having black friends there that it just wasn't like, I was like, okay, it's more of the same, maybe just crack on, I'm going to join an a cappella group, you know, have a great time. And so Oxford, weirdly, Oxford for me was the first time that I went to an educational institution where my black friends were at the same educational institution as me. So like previously when I was at school, I went and joined the athletics club so that I could like have a more diverse set of friends through that. I was really active at my church because I went to this like big church in Hackney, and you know, you can imagine it wasn't a white church, it was just full of Nigerians and Jamaicans, and we had a great time. I used to like hang out with my cousins. One of my aunties had 7 sons and they all lived in Hackney, and I'd go there every weekend to hang out with people. So for me, weirdly, at Oxford, the first thing I did was join the ACS, and I was just like, oh my gosh, there's 20 of us here. So like my mindset wasn't even, why is there only 20 black people at Oxford? It was, wow, I'm surrounded by 20 black people and we can all hang out and have a great time. So yeah, I enjoyed it at that time. If I were to go back to Oxford now, it would be a very, very different experience. But yeah, I really enjoyed it for what it was at the time, and I'm still friends with all those people as well. So, is
that the Afro-Caribbean Society?
Yeah, so it's African Caribbean Society. Yes, yeah. We basically would meet up and like go to the R&B night at Park End every Saturday. And
Travis sent me as the Travers rep to the Afro-Caribbean Society law event because there were no black trainees. And I didn't realize what it was until I got there, but that's a separate story.
wow.
We need to do like a part 2 of this session, I think. Shaheen, one for you, please. How did you manage to remain motivated throughout your legal journey and build the confidence to keep going despite being from an underrepresented group?
Remaining motivated is such a difficult thing to do, especially when you come from an underrepresented group, like ourselves on the panel. One of the biggest things that sort of goes unhighlighted is mental health, especially amongst BAME practitioners, especially when you're at a junior sort of practice quite early on in your career. It does impact you, and it does sort of affect your ambitions, your motivations, especially when you enter the profession quite early on. You're quite full of energy, you want to go places, you want to, some people want to become partners, some people want to enter the judiciary. But later on, when you realize the opportunities are quite limited and your background because of your race or religion is being affected, that starts impacting you. And staying motivated, personally, is something that I've struggled with. It's something that doesn't really help when you're suffering from, forms of depression or stress or anxiety, and you're sort of questioning yourself rather than questioning the system itself. And you're sort of sitting there and you're thinking, how far can I actually go? Do I really want to stay in the profession? Doesn't really help when you come from a background like myself, British Bangladeshi, where there's a lot of pressure, especially when you're an Asian male. To succeed, you're seen as someone with a lot of pressure on your shoulders. You want to do well. You want to be vouching for your community essentially, and if you don't do well, you might be perceived as a failure. So it's self-motivation comes through time. But one of the things that I used to do quite early on in my career was actually seek mentors and actually seek help from people who are actually in that same position and ask for their advice. So panel talks such as this, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I would have been participating and I would have chased up those who spoke, asked for their experiences. And when you hear the story, there seems to be such similar stories amongst the board itself. You realize you're not the only person going through the same thing in the profession itself. You realize that it's so common that it no longer becomes like something out of the norm. It's more about correlating your experiences, actually understanding that you can actually make a change to the legal profession itself. So staying motivated is something that fluctuates. It goes from highs to lows. Mental health is something that's not really discussed, especially when you're from a BAME background. And I feel like addressing those issues, really does help in the long run. So it's natural not to feel motivated, but it's also something that you shouldn't, keep inside yourself. You should speak with others, sort of understand and appreciate what the journey others have gone through, and realize that coming together, you can actually share a positive motivation going forward.
That's great. Thanks so much, Shaheen. And thank you for bringing that really important perspective to this session. I'm hoping to at some point have a specific session around kind of well-being and mental health in the legal profession. So hopefully we can talk about that in a bit more detail at that session. Possibly one for Abby and Shanti. How expensive is it to qualify as a barrister in the UK? Are there scholarships, or do chambers sponsor part of people's tuitions? And this is from somebody that's studied in Ireland, so I imagine the system's a little bit different. Do you guys just want to give an overview of kind of scholarships and the ins and stuff like that here? Shall I go to Shanti first?
Yep, it's way too expensive, disproportionately expensive. Once you've managed to get through uni, I went to university quite a long time ago now. So it was back before the fees are raised. And once you've got through uni, you've also got the bar course or the LPC. If you're going to the bar, the Inns of Court have scholarships. The thing about them is that some of them are means-based, but the majority are just merit. And so it again comes back to this idea of what is, or how is merit assessed. So whilst they have quite a lot set aside for scholarships for people to do the bar course, I still don't think it's quite enough. And also, in my view, it's not the best way to ensure accessibility to the bar if it's based on a scholarship that you may or may not be able to get. Beyond that, in terms of chambers funding, I am aware that there are some chambers that I think will give you an advance on your pupillage fund. I'm not very sure about the details of it because I think it's mostly chancery sets. So it's not in the areas that I always wanted to practice in terms of immigration or crime. And in those sets, you tend to actually, some of them are paying much better of pupillage awards, but you still need to be aware that there's quite a lot that have pupillage awards that are less than minimum wage. And so you'll be earning next to nothing if you end up having a pupillage at one of those sets. And I think when we're talking about taking off the rose tinted glasses, that's unfortunate reality of the bar that just shows how exclusionary it can be, because it can just be so difficult to be able to survive at the bar, not just once you've paid for your BPTC fees, but also surviving through pupillage.
Thanks, Shanti. Abby, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, so I interviewed for scholarships. So I did it this year for the first time, and I'm at Inner Temple, so I can give some insight into what the Inner Temple regime is like. So in terms of scholarships, every scholarship, every exhibition that Inner Temple gives is means assessed. So what you have is, first of all, do you meet the criteria of excellence in terms of potential to qualify for any type of award? And then as long as you meet that criteria, you will get an award. And then the second stage is, how much does that person receive? And the amount that you receive will be reflective of what your financial circumstances are like. And I was actually really impressed this year with the way that they consider means, because it's not just looking at, you don't just tick a box and say, I have X, I have Y. Because one of the things, for example, that I noticed at Oxford had an Oxford Opportunity Bursary. And for you to qualify for the Oxford Opportunity Bursary, you just had to give indications of what your household's finances looked like. And some people got around that by just putting down their mum's income, for example, and not putting down their father's. So it would skew it and make it seem as though they didn't have much coming in, and on that basis they qualified in terms of means. Whereas the Inner Temple scholarship system is really in depth. So first of all, you can opt in or you can opt out of putting in your financial information. And then the actual questionnaire is quite thorough. You put down what you earn, what anybody else in your household earns. You put down what your expenses are. So if you have a child, if you look on the face of it as though you're earning well, but you have a child, you have a sick parent, you have debt arising from a master's or whatever as well, all of that is taken into account and that's looked at. If you're asked questions as to how it is that you would live while you're doing the BPTC, and if it's apparent that you would work at the same time, that you would be in rented accommodation and that you wouldn't receive assistance from your home, you're viewed as being of higher means. So you're not penalised for being somebody who takes the initiative to work, which I think is what happens with a lot of people who are from BAME backgrounds, which is that we're very proactive in terms of creating opportunities for ourselves. And sometimes that can work against you when you're looking at means assessments, because then on the face of it, you seem to have an income. And then people will say, well, they don't need the money as much. Whereas some other person who will be at home, not work, and they're in their parents' house, they have no income, we would view that person as being better off because they don't have to pay rent, because they have the advantage of living with a parent. If their family is London-based, for example, that's an advantage because you're not having to come down from Birmingham or wherever else to come and do the BPTC if you've chosen to do it in London. So it's quite an in-depth process in terms of looking at means, as well as so in terms of awarding the actual amounts. And other thing to highlight for anybody who is thinking about applying is that there are things like the PAST scheme at Inner Temple, which is a really in-depth process of assisting people who are interested in joining the bar but don't have connections, have never had any sort of advocacy experience, just really don't know what the Inns of Court are like, don't know what barristers' chambers are like, and so on. So if you're from a state school background, and it's a certain type of state school, so it's not just, you know, you can't just go through if you're from a grammar school. If you're from an inner city state school, for example, you apply through the scheme, they ask you a few questions, you get onto the scheme, and then you're given advocacy training, you're given talks by barristers and so on to try to normalise the bar and make it more accessible. So there are things which happen to try to do that, but it still does remain, in my opinion, something which is far too expensive. Like Shanti said, the bar course is, I think, pitiful. I think that you spend a lot of time learning stuff that you then spend a lot of time unlearning the moment you become a barrister. Like all of the stuff that I learned in advocacy, I basically was repeatedly told at every advocacy training session as a pupil, and bear in mind I did 2.5 years of pupillage, I was basically told that everything that I had learned was wrong and that that's not the way to do it. So, but it's something that's necessary that you have to do. But what I would say is you don't need to rush to do the bar course. You can apply for pupillage before doing the bar course. And so I would take advantage and try and get the advocacy training and access and exposure to courts and so on, if you can, before doing bar school. Try to secure the pupillage or at least your scholarship before bar school, so that you're not getting into debt by going to bar school only to then, you know, be unable to secure the pupillage later. You also only have 5 years from when you're called to the bar to get pupillage, so that adds that pressure on. Whereas you could work as a paralegal, you can do other things, you're still working towards building your CV and so on without having to do the bar course. You're not missing out by not taking the bar course, trust me.
Yeah, I think all of those are really valid points and really important. I just wanted to really quickly make the distinction for the person that asked the question, just to make it clear that the way that it works is that you do the BPTC first, which is kind of like the professional, a vocational course, if you like, which is a year full-time or 2 years part-time. And that's the thing that's really, really expensive. And after you finish that, you then have to apply and get a pupillage, which is the 12-month kind of training program for baby barristers, often longer than 12 months. But what Shanti was saying, that it's sometimes those awards that are pitifully low as well, which makes it very, very difficult. And so it's just to be mindful about what awards particular chambers offer and things like that. I'm conscious of the time. I'm going to ask Raj to deal with the last one. I think we've got through most of the questions relating to the theme at least, and then I'm going to draw it to a close. And the last question is, does it get better as you develop through your career?
Does what get better?
I don't know. It's just phrased like that. So I'm assuming maybe like all these issues, perhaps?
I don't think they do. I think you just become better at dealing with them. You develop resilience, you develop networks of support, you develop a realistic perspective so things don't shock you as they used to. The hurt goes away, the hurt gets better because you're not as shocked. It also starts to feel less personal. Like Shaheen was saying, you learn that it's a problem rigged against your type of people, not you personally, and that really helps. I also just want to say that, you know, just touch on, yes, there is this issue with solicitors as well. It's called the leaky pipeline. So you know, BAME solicitors might make it through, but then they all drop out between 2 and 4 years. So it's like referenced as the leaky pipeline, which is so sinister. Like there's a pipeline coming through, but they're all falling away. So it doesn't get better because the world is shit. And you know, I think the recent politics and all of that will show us that it doesn't get better. A quote that I live by is just, you know, it's not a war, it's just the same battle to be fought again and again and again. And I think when you realize that, it kind of hardens you to the truth. So it gets better in that it gets easier to deal with, not because it stops happening.
Thanks, Raj. I said it was the last, but I've just really got one more, and it's because it's one that I wanted to ask Abby to deal with it, only because I know that you've sat on E&D committees and what your approach to it would be. As I said, I wasn't able to secure somebody on the panel that identified as somebody that had a disability. But the question, Abby, if you feel able to deal with it, is I have a visible disability that has given me life experience and skills, but I am not sure how or whether to address these on application forms. I don't know whether any of the specific E&D training that you've been on deals with that particular point.
Yeah, it does. And I think actually what I found really interesting about that question is I think the question itself highlighted the reason why you should definitely put it on a form if you feel comfortable with doing so, which is that you have already acknowledged in asking the question that it's given you life experience and it's given you skills. When you think about what the role of a lawyer is supposed to be, we are supposed to be the voice of whoever we're representing if they had the legal training that we do. And that means that we are supposed to be diverse. We're supposed to represent a whole plethora of people, and even reflective of the fact that we found it difficult to find somebody with a disability to join this panel, even with the network that she has. I think that shows how lacking we are in certain areas. I think those things are assets. I think that there is so much prejudice that we face for being part of minority groups in certain areas that when you are able to actually turn around that conversation, when you're able to introduce the fact that you have something which would otherwise potentially make you feel othered, and you're supposed to, and you're able to show it as a strength, you definitely should. So in terms of the training that I have given, the training that I have undertaken, in every aspect, whether that's been sitting on the management committee in chambers, whether that's sifting through pupillage applications, whether that is being on the scholarship interview panel, the prevalent view is that if somebody is able to advocate for themselves, and be open in that way, it's a positive. So I definitely would put it on the form, as long as you are comfortable doing so, but also bear in mind that if it's something that you put on a form, then you might find yourself in a position where somebody on the panel asks you questions about it. They should do so sensitively, because they ought to have received training about the proper way to put those questions. It feeds back into that first question that I dealt with at the beginning of this conversation. But if the reality is, if you put it down and you're very full about it, they probably won't ask you about it because they can see what they need to from the form. But definitely include it, and seek advice from somebody that that's in the profession, or reach out to anybody on LinkedIn if you want them to maybe check it over and just check that what you've put down is okay. I'm sure that it will be. I can't think of why anything that you would write on a form about yourself would not be fine. But yeah, don't feel like you need to hold back.
Thanks so much, Abby. I'm going to draw the session to a close. Thank you all so very much for joining us on this session today. I hope you found it useful. Thank you to each of our speakers, who I'm sure you'll all agree were fantastic with all their various experience and insights and honest insights about the profession. I would really urge you all to, I don't want you to feel disheartened on the back of this session, but I hope that you will pursue your careers in kind of with more of a context about the situation that you're in, or that you might find yourself in, not to feel disheartened, carry on with it, but just always remember that it's okay if things don't work out the first time round or the second time round, and that there are other people that you can reach out to for mentorship and coaching, and that we'll all try and do whatever we can for you. And when you do get there, please always remember that the fight doesn't stop there, that we all have a responsibility and a platform and the privilege in order to challenge everything that is wrong about this system. And until that changes, which I don't think it will anytime soon, we need all of you. So don't give up on your legal journeys. And we hope that we'll see many of you again soon. Thanks so much. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.